Today I'm coming to you from my home, but I originally recorded this and I had a really interesting experience. But today I'm coming to you to read an article that was written by a journalist in the late 1800s who went undercover into a mental ward to basically uncover what was going on there. And where did I go to read this? I went to the graveyard of the Dixmont State Hospital, and that was a hospital that was built here in 1862, and it was for the mentally ill. It was known as a highly self-sufficient and park-like campus. They really encouraged the patients to do things on their own and give them a little more freedom. Unfortunately, due to poor state funding, the hospital closed in 1984 and it was demolished in 2006. So the only part of that land that the state actually kept was the graveyard area. So there are a bunch of unmarked graves. So I thought, what better place to go to read this article than to read it to any of the spirits that are at Dixmont State Hospital still. So I went and I brought my dowsing rods, and I got some interesting responses with them. I'm still a little skeptical of that instrument, but I will put that at the end of this. So why didn't my original recording work? Because my dumb ass decided to wear a leather vest. Not a leather vest, a leather jacket. So this is completely my fault. I apologize, but the audio is completely wrecked because all you hear in between is just the movement of this jacket. So with that said, I would love to start with the story. And this is 10 Days in a Madhouse by Nellie Bly. And this was published in 1877. So Nellie Bly, let me just give you the little introduction here. Since my experiences in Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum were published in The World, I have received hundreds of letters in regard to it. The edition containing my story long since ran out, and I have been prevailed upon to allow it to be published in book form to satisfy the hundreds who are yet asking for copies. I'm happy to be able to state, as a result of my visit to the asylum and the exposures consequent thereon, that the city of New York has appropriated $1 million more per annum than ever before for the care of the insane. So I have least the satisfaction of knowing that the poor unfortunates will be better cared for because of my work. Now, I can say that, let me know what you think, but the vibe that I do get from this writer is she's a little full of herself, but hey, she was a woman carving her way in a crazy world back then, and I'm sure being a female journalist was not an easy task. So, let's get into this. Chapter 1, A Delicate Mission. On the 22nd of September, I was asked by the World if I could have myself committed to one of the asylums for the insane in New York, with a view to writing a plan, an unvarnished narrative of the treatment of the patients therein, and the methods of management, etc. Did I think I had the courage to go through such an ordeal as the mission would demand? Could I assume the characteristics of insanity to such a degree that I could pass the doctors, live for a week among the insane without the authorities there finding out that I was only a chiel among em taking notes. I said I believed I could. I had some faith in my own ability as an actress, and I thought I could assume insanity long enough to accomplish any mission entrusted in me. Could I pass a week in the insane ward at Blackwell's Island? I said I could, and I would. And I did. My instructions were simply to go on with my work as soon as I felt that I was ready. I was to chronicle faithfully the experiences I underwent, and when once within the walls of the asylum, to find out and describe its inside workings, which are always so effectually hidden by white-capped nurses as well as by bolts and bars from the knowledge of the public. We do not ask you to go there for the purpose of making sensational revelations. Write up things as you find them, good or bad. Give praise or blame as you think best, and the truth all the time. But I'm afraid of that chronic smile of yours, said the editor. I will smile no more, I said, and I went away to execute my delicate and, as I found out, difficult mission. If I did get into the asylum, which I hardly hoped to do, I had no idea that my experiences would contain aught else than a simple tale of life in an asylum, that such an institution could be mismanaged, and the cruelties couldn't exist neath its roof I did not deem possible. I always had a desire to know asylum life more thoroughly, a desire to be convinced that the most helpless of God's creatures, the insane, were cared for kindly and properly. The many stories I had read of abuses in such institutions I had regarded as wildly exaggerated, or else romances. Yet there was a latent desire to know positively. I shuddered to think how completely the insane were in the power of their keepers, and how one could weep and plead for release, and all of no avail. If the keepers were so minded, eagerly I accepted the mission to learn the inside workings of the Blackwell Insane Asylum. How will you get me out, I asked my editor, after I once get in? Now that is a good question, and that, I think, is the most important question to ask here, right? How are you getting out? So here's what her editor says. I do not know, he replied, but we will get you out, if we have to tell who you are and for what purpose you feigned insanity only to get in. So we'll get you out even if we have to tell them that you're an undercover snitch. I feel like that sounds really dangerous. In the late 1800s, a woman snitching on the inner workings of probably a state-run facility. Come on. I had little belief in my ability to deceive the insanity experts, and I think my editor had less. All the preliminary preparations for my ordeal were left to be planned by myself. Only one thing was decided upon, namely, that I should pass under the pseudonym of Nellie Brown, the initials of which would agree with my own name and my linen, so that there would be no difficulty in keeping track of my movements and assisting me out of any difficulties or dangers I might get into. There were ways of getting into the insane ward, but I did not know them. I might adopt one of two courses. Either I could feign insanity at the house of friends and get myself committed on the decision of two competent physicians, or I could go to my goal by way of the police courts. On reflection, I thought it wiser not to inflict myself upon my friends or to get any good-natured doctors to assist me in my purpose. Besides, to get Blackwell's Island, my Besides, to get to Blackwell's Island, my friends would have to feign poverty, and unfortunately for the end I had in view, my acquaintance with the struggling poor, except my own self, was only very superficial. So I determined upon the plan which led me to the successful accomplishment of my mission. I succeeded in getting committed to the insane ward at Blackwell's Island, where I spent 10 days and nights and had an experience which I shall never forget. I took upon myself to enact the part of a poor, unfortunate, crazy girl, and felt it my duty not to shrink any of the disagreeable results that should follow. I became one of the city's insane wards for that length of time, experienced much, and saw and heard more of the treatment accorded to this helpless class of our population, and when I had seen and heard enough, my release was promptly secured. I left the insane ward with pleasure and regret, pleasure that I was once more able to enjoy the free breath of heaven, regret that I could not have brought with me some of the unfortunate women who lived and suffered with me, and who, I am convinced, are just as sane as I was and am now myself. But here, let me say one thing. From the moment I entered the insane ward on the island, I made no attempt to keep up the assumed role of insanity. I talked and acted just as I do in ordinary life. Yet, strange to say, the more sanely I talked and acted, the crazier I was thought to be by all except one physician, whose kindness and gentle ways I shall not soon forget. Chapter 2. Preparing for the Ordeal. But to return to my work and my mission, after receiving my instructions, I returned to my boarding house, and when evening came, I began to practice the role in which I was to make my debut on the morrow. What a difficult task, I thought, to appear before a crowd of people and convince them that I was insane. I had never been near insane persons before in my life, and had not the faintest idea of what their actions were like. And then to be examined by a number of learned physicians who make insanity a specialty and who daily come in contact with insane people? How could I hope to pass these doctors and convince them that I was crazy? I feared that they could not be deceived. I began to think my task a hopeless one, but it had to be done. So I flew to the mirror and examined my face. I remember all I had read of the doings of crazy people. How, first of all, they have staring eyes. And so I opened mine as wide as possible and stared unblinkingly at my own reflection. I assure you the sight was not reassuring, even to myself, especially in the dead of night. I tried to turn the gas up higher in hopes that it would raise my courage. I succeeded only partially, but I consoled myself with the thought that in a few nights more I would not be there, but locked up in a cell with a lot of lunatics. So when she says I tried to turn up the gas higher, was she gassing herself up? Get it? The weather was not cold, but nevertheless, when I thought of what was to come, wintry chills ran races up and down my back, in very mockery of the perspiration which was slowly but surely taking the curl out of my bangs. Between times, practicing before the mirror and picturing my future as a lunatic, I read snatches of improbable and impossible ghost stories, so that when the dawn came to chase away the night, I felt that I was in a fit mood for my mission, yet hungry enough to feel keenly that I wanted my breakfast. Slowly and sadly, I took my morning bath and quietly bade farewell to a few of the most precious articles known to modern civilization. Tenderly, I put my toothbrush aside and when taking a final rub of the soap, I murmured, "It may be 4 days, and it may be for longer." Then I donned the old clothing I had selected for the occasion. I was in the mood to look at everything through very serious glasses. It's just as well to take a last fond look, I mused, for who could tell but that the strain of playing crazy and being shut up with a crowd of mad people might turn my own brain, and I would never get back. But not once did I think of shrinking my mission. Calmly, outwardly at least, I went out to my crazy business. I first thought it best to go to a boarding house, and after securing lodging confidently, telling the landlady or lord, whichever chance it might be, that I was seeking work, and in a few days after, apparently, go insane. When I reconsidered the idea, I feared that it would take too long to mature. Suddenly, I thought how much easier it would be to go to a boarding home for working women. I knew if once I made a house full of women believe me crazy, that they would never rest until I was out of their reach and in secure quarters. That's because bitches don't mess around. If girls think you're crazy, they're going to team up against you and make fun of you, alienate you, push you out. It's an animalistic thing that women do. It's true. Girls, you know how it goes. From a directory, I selected the temporary home for females, number 84 2nd Avenue. As I walked down the avenue, I determined that once inside the home, I should do the best I could to get started on my journey to Blackwell's Island and the Insane Asylum. Chapter 3. In the Temporary Home. I was left to begin my career as Nellie Brown, the insane girl. As I walked down the avenue, I tried to assume the look which maidens wear in pictures entitled "Dreaming," "Far Away." Expressions have a crazy air. I passed through the little paved yard to the entrance of the home. I pulled the bell, which sounded long enough for a church chime, and nervously awaited the opening of the door to the home, which I intended should ere long cast me forth and out upon the charity of the police. The door was thrown back with a vengeance, and a short, yellow-haired girl of some 13 summers stood before me. "Is the matron in?" I asked faintly. "Yes, she's in. She's busy. Go to the back parlor," answered the girl in a loud voice, with one change in her well, we found a word I can't say. Peculiarly, why can't I say this? I know I can. Peculiarly mature face. Sorry. I followed these not over-kind or polite instructions and found myself in a dark, uncomfortable back parlor. There I awaited the arrival of my hostess. I had been seated some 20 minutes at least when a slender woman clad in a plain dark dress entered and stopped before me, ejaculated inquiringly, "Well?" Interesting choice of words. "Are you the matron?" I asked. "No," she replied. "The matron is sick. I'm her assistant. What do you want?" I want to stay here for a few days, if you can accommodate me." "Well, I have no single rooms. We're so crowded. But if you will occupy a room with another girl, I shall do that much for you." "I shall be glad of that," I answered. "How much do you charge?" I had only brought about 70 cents along with me, knowing full well that the sooner my funds were exhausted, the sooner I should be put out, and to be put out was what I was working for. "We charge 30 cents a night," was her reply to my question. And with that, I paid her for one night's lodging, and she left me on the plea of having something else to look after. Left to amuse myself as best I could, I took a survey of my surroundings. They were not cheerful, to say the least. A wardrobe, desk, bookcase, organ, and several chairs completed the furnishment of the room, into which the daylight barely came. By the time I had become familiar with my quarters, a bell, which rivaled the doorbell in its loudness, began clanging in the basement, and simultaneously women went trooping downstairs from all parts of the house. I imagined, from obvious signs, that dinner was served. But as no one had said anything to me, I made no effort to follow the hungry train. Yet I did wish that someone would invite me down. It always produces such a lonely, homesick feeling to know others are eating, and we haven't a chance, even if we're not hungry. I can relate with that. I'm always hungry, even when I'm not hungry, and if I see other people eating, I get food envy. I was glad when the assistant matron came up and asked me if I did not want something to eat. I replied that I did, and then I asked her what her name was. Miss Standard, she said, and I immediately wrote it down in a notebook that I had taken with me for the purpose of making memoranda, and in which I had written several pages of utter nonsense for inquisitive scientists. Thus equipped, I awaited developments, but my dinner, well, I followed Miss Standard down the uncarpeted stairs into the basement, where a large number of women were eating. She found room for me at a table with 3 other women. The short-haired slavey who had opened the door now put in an appearance as a waiter. I don't like that term at all. Nope, don't like that. Not appreciative of how people were treated back then. Placing her arms akimbo and staring me out of countenance, she said, "Boiled mutton, boiled beef, beans, potatoes, coffee, or tea?" "Beef, potatoes, coffee, and bread," I responded. "Bitch, she didn't say bread. She didn't say bread was an option, you rude, assumptive woman." "Bread goes in," she explained, and she made her way to the kitchen, which was in the rear. It was not very long before she returned with what I had ordered on a large, badly battered tray, which she banged down before me. I began my simple meal. It was not very enticing, so while making a feint of eating, I watched the others. I've often moralized on the repulsive form charity always assumes. Here was a home for deserving women, and yet what a mockery the name was. The floor was bare, and the little wooden tables were sublimely ignorant of such modern beautifiers as varnish, polish, and table covers. It is useless to talk about the cheapness of linen and its effect on civilization. Yet these honest workers, the most deserving of women, are asked to call this spot of bareness home. When the meal was finished, each woman went to the desk in the corner, where Miss Standard sat and paid her bill. I was given a much used and abused red check by the original piece of humanity in shape of my waitress. My bill was about 30 cents. After dinner, I went upstairs and resumed my former place in the back parlor. I was quite cold and uncomfortable, and had fully made up my mind that I could not endure this sort of business long, so the sooner I assumed my insane points, the sooner I would be released from enforced idleness. That was indeed the longest day I had ever lived. I listlessly watched the women in the front parlor, where all sat except myself. One did nothing but read and scratch her head and occasionally call out mildly, "Georgie," without lifting her eyes from her book. Georgie was her overly frisky boy who had more noise in him than any child I ever saw before. He did everything that was rude and unmannerly, I thought, and the mother never said a word unless she heard someone else yell at him. Another woman always kept going to sleep and waking herself up with her own snoring. I really felt wickedly thankful that it was only herself she awakened. The majority of the women sat there doing nothing, but there were a few who made lace and knitted unceasingly. The enormous doorbell seemed to be going all the time, and so did the short-haired girl. The latter was, besides, one of the girls who sing all the time snatches of all the songs and hymns that have been composed for the last 50 years. There is such a thing as maîtredom in these days. The ringing of the bell brought more people who wanted shelter for the night. Excepting one woman who was from the country on a day's shopping expedition, they were working women, and some of them with children. As it drew towards evening, Miss Standard came to me and said, "What is wrong with you? Have you some sorrow or trouble?" "No," I said, almost stunned at the suggestion. "Why?" "Oh, because," she said, womanlike. "I can see it in your face. It tells a story of great trouble." Yes. Everything is so sad," I said in a haphazard way, which I had intended to reflect my craziness. "But you must not allow that to worry you. We all have our troubles, but we get over them in good time. What kind of work are you trying to get?" "I don't know. It's all so sad," I replied. "Would you like to be a nurse for children and wear a nice white cap and apron?" she asked. I put my handkerchief up to my face to hide a smile and replied in a muffled tone, "I never worked. I don't know." "But you must learn," she urged. "All these women here work." "Do they?" I said in a low, thrilling whisper. "Why, they look horrible to me, just like crazy women. I'm so afraid of them." "They don't look very nice," she answered assentingly. "But they are good, honest working women. We do not keep crazy people here." I again used my handkerchief to hide a smile, as I thought that before morning she would at least think she had one crazy person among her flock. "They all look crazy," I asserted again, "and I'm afraid of them. There's so many crazy people about, and one can never tell what they will do. Then there's so many murders committed, and the police never catch the murderers." And I finished with a sob that would have broken up an audience of Blay's critics. She gave me a sudden convulsive start, and I knew my first stroke had gone home. It was amusing to see what a remarkably short time it took her to get up from her chair and to whisper hurriedly, "I'll come back and talk with you after a while." I knew she would not come back, and she did not. When the supper bell rang, I went along with the others to the basement and partook of the evening meal, which was similar to dinner. What the heck? What's the difference between supper and dinner? What is this, too? Was this fourth meal? This was fourth meal. Except that there was a smaller bill of fare and more people. The women who are employed outside during the day have returned, and after the evening meal we all adjourned to the parlors, where we all sat, or stood, as there were not chairs enough to go round. It was a wretchedly lonely evening, and the nightlight which fell from the solitary gas jets in the parlor and oil lamp in the hall helped to envelope us in a dusky hue and dye our spirits navy blue. I felt it would not require many inundations of this atmosphere to make me a fit subject for the place I was striving to reach. I watched two women who seemed of all the crowd to be the most sociable, and I selected them as the ones to work out my salvation, or more properly speaking, my condemnation and conviction. Excusing myself and saying that I felt lonely, I asked if I might join their company. They graciously consented, so with my hat and gloves on, which no one had asked me to lay aside, I sat down and listened to the rather wearisome conversation in which I took no part, merely keeping up my sad look saying, yes, or no, or I can't say, to their observations. Several times I told them I thought everybody in the house looked crazy, but they were so slow to catch on to my very original remark. One said her name was Miss King and that she was a Southern woman. Then she said that I had a Southern accent. She asked me bluntly if I did not really come from the South. I said yes. The other woman got to talking about the Boston boats and asked me if I knew at what time they left. And for a moment, I forgot my role of assumed insanity, and I told her the correct hour of departure. Crap. She then asked me what work I was going to do, or if I had ever done any. I replied that I thought it very sad that there were so many working people in the world. She said in reply that she had been unfortunate and had come to New York when she had worked at correcting proofs on a medical dictionary for some time, but that her health had given way under the task and that she was now going to Boston again. When the maid came up to tell us to go to bed, I remarked that I was afraid, and again ventured to the assertion that all the women in the house seemed to be crazy. The nurse insisted on my going to bed. I asked if I could not sit on the stairs, but she said decisively, no, for everyone in the house would think you're crazy. Finally, I allowed them to take me to a room. Here I must introduce a new personage by name into my narrative. It is the woman who had been a proofreader and was about to return to Boston. She was a Miss Kane, who was as courageous as she was good-hearted. She came into my room and sat and talked with me a long time, taking down my hair with gentle ways. She tried to persuade me to undress and go to bed, but I stubbornly refused to do so. During this time, a number of inmates of the house had gathered around us. They expressed themselves in various ways. Poor Loon, they said. Why, she's crazy enough. I'm afraid to stay with such a crazy being in the house. She'll murder us all before morning. One woman was for sending for a policeman to take me at once. They were all in a terrible and real state of fright. No one wanted to be responsible for me, and the woman who was to occupy the room with me declared that she would not stay with that crazy woman for all the money of the Vanderbilts. It was then that Miss Kane said she would stay with me. I told her I would like to have her do so. So she was left with me. She didn't undress, but laid down on the bed, watchful of my movements. She tried to induce me to lie down, but I was afraid to do this. I knew that if I once gave way, I should fall asleep and dream as pleasantly and peacefully as a child. I should, to use a slang expression, be liable to give myself dead away. So I insisted on sitting on the side of the bed and staring blankly at vacancy. My poor companion was put into a wretched state of unhappiness. Every few moments she would rise up and look at me. She told me that my eyes shone terribly brightly, and then she began to question me, asking me where I had lived, how long I had been in New York, what I had been doing, and many things besides. To all her questioning, I had but one response. I told her that I had forgotten everything, that ever since my headache had come on, I could not remember. Poor soul, how cruelly I tortured her, and what a kind heart she had, but how I tortured all of them. One of them dreamed of me as a nightmare. After I'd been in the room an hour or so, I was myself startled by hearing a woman screaming in the next room. I began to imagine that I was really in an insane asylum. Miss Kane woke up, looked around frightened, and listened. She then went out into the next room, and I heard her asking another woman some questions. When she came back, she told me that the woman had a hideous nightmare. She had been dreaming of me. She had seen me and said I was rushing at her with a knife in my hand, with the intention of killing her. In trying to escape me, she had fortunately been able to scream and so to awaken herself and scare off her nightmare. Then Miss Kane got into bed again, considerably agitated but very sleepy. I was weary too, but I had to brace myself up to the work and was determined to keep awake all night so as to carry on my work of impersonation to a successful end in the morning. I heard midnight. I had yet 6 hours to wait for daylight. The time passed with excruciating slowness. Minutes appeared hours. The noises in the house and on the avenue ceased. Fearing that sleep would coax me into its grasp, I commenced to review my life. How strange it all seems. One incident, if never so trifling, is but a link more to chain us to our unchangeable fate. I began at the beginning and lived again the story of my life. Old friends were recalled with a pleasurable thrill. Old enemies, old heartaches, old joys were once again present. The turned-down pages of my life were turned up, and the past was present. When it was completed, I turned my thoughts bravely to the future, wondering first what the next day would bring forth, and then making plans for the carrying out of my project. I wondered if I should be able to pass over the river to the goal of my strange ambition, to become eventually an inmate of the halls inhabited by my mentally wrecked sisters. And then, once in, what would be my experience? And after? How to get out? I said, they'll get me out. That was the greatest night of my existence. For a few hours, I stood face to face with self. I looked out towards the window and hailed with joy the slight shimmer of dawn. The light grew strong and gray, but the silence was strikingly still. My companion slept. I had still an hour or two to pass over. Fortunately, I found some employment for my mental activity. Robert Bruce, in his captivity, had won confidence in the future and passed his time as pleasantly as possible under the circumstances by watching the celebrated spider build his web. I had less noble vermin to interest me, yet I believe I made some valuable discoveries in natural history. I was about to drop off to sleep in spite of myself when I suddenly startled to wakefulness. I thought I had heard something crawl and fall down upon the counterpane with an almost inaudible thud. I had the opportunity of studying these interesting animals very thoroughly. They had evidently come for breakfast and were not a little disappointed to find that their principal plat was not there. They scampered up and down the pillow, came together, seemed to hold interesting converse, and acted in every way as if they were puzzled by the absence of an appetizing breakfast. After one consultation of some length, they finally disappeared, seeking victims elsewhere, and leaving me to pass the long minutes by giving my attention to cockroaches, whose size and agility were something of a surprise to me. Gross, we don't do bugs here. Nope. My room companion had been sound asleep for a long time, but she now woke up and expressed surprise at seeing me still awake and apparently as lively as a cricket. She was as sympathetic as ever. She came to me and took my hand and tried her best to console me, and asked me if I did not want to go home. She kept me upstairs until nearly everybody was out of the house, and then took me down to the basement for coffee and a bun. After that, partaken in silence, I went back to my room where I sat down, moping. Miss Kane grew more and more anxious. "What is to be done?" she kept exclaiming. "Where are your friends?" "No," I answered. "I have no friends. But I have some trunks. Where are they? I want them." The good woman tried to pacify me, saying that they would be found in good time. She believed I was insane. Yet I forgive her. It's only after one is in trouble that one realizes how little sympathy and kindness there are in the world. The women in the home who were not afraid of me had wanted to have some amusement at my expense, and so they had bothered me with questions and remarks that had I been insane would have been cruel and inhumane. Only this one woman among the crowd, pretty and delicate Miss Kane, displayed true womanly feeling. She compelled the others to cease teasing me and took the bed of the woman who refused to sleep near me. She protested against the suggestion to leave me alone and to have me locked up for the night so I could harm no one. She insisted on remaining with me in order to administer aid should I need it. She smoothed my hair and bathed my brow and talked as soothingly to me as a mother would do to an ailing child. By every means she tried to have me go to bed and rest, and when it drew toward morning, she got up and wrapped a blanket around me for fear I might get cold. And then she kissed me on the brow and whispered compassionately, "Poor child, poor child." How much I admit that little woman's courage and kindness, how much I admired that little woman's courage and kindness. How I longed to reassure her and whisper that I was not insane. And how I hoped that if any poor girl should ever be so unfortunate as to be what I was pretending to be, she might meet with the one who possessed the same spirit of human kindness possessed by Miss Ruth Kane. And that's where we're going to stop today. But it's getting to the juicy part. Because after this, our next chapter is Judge Duffy and the police, and that is followed by her actually being pronounced insane and going into the asylum. So, big deal. It's gonna get good. So, let me know if you enjoyed this. I know it was a longer read. I'm playing a little with soft-spoken stuff because I actually think I may be a little bit better at that, but I can do both. I can continue with more whisper stuff. Let me know what you think. I'll add a couple little bonus clips here at the end, apologizing now for the audio, but you can see me messing with the dowsing rods and let me know if you think that this stuff is legit. All right, thank you so much for coming by. See you next time. Namaste. See you later. I have dowsing rods. These actually were used, and I'm pretty sure created initially to help find water underground. If you walk, as soon as you walk over an area where there is an underground source of water, they will cross, like so. But a lot of paranormal investigators do like to use it for spirit communication. So these things, and in my car here, I obviously don't have the best amount of room. And just to show you, like if we tilt like this, it'll affect it. So I'm going to try to hold my hands really still. And I don't know what I think about these yet, but I thought it might be a fun thing to see if we could make communication with anyone here. Okay, if there's anyone here today, could you do me a favor? Well, one, thank you for coming and dealing with me. Could you do me a favor and make these cross like an X if there is anyone here? Cross like an X. I would say that's pretty crossed. Now, can you make them go both point in the same direction? Make both of the ends of these rods point in the same direction to let me know that you're still here. That's opposite. Can they point in the same direction? I would say that's the same direction. That's really great. Thank you so much. Now, if you are here, can you make them cross again? Now look, I'm even holding this like this. Can you make them cross again? That's good. So what do you think? Do you think that this is me subconsciously doing this, or do you think it could be a spirit? Now, if this is a spirit, I thank you for coming today. I'm going to read you a story. Would you like to hear a story? If you'd like to hear a story, can you make these both point towards my camera? And that's what's in front of me. That's my camera. So if you'd like to hear a story, can you make these rods point towards my camera? That's one. Can you make the second rod point towards the camera? The one in my right hand? Can you make... Oh, great job. That's a great job. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. And I'm going to have to set these down. But let me ask, I guess, before I start. I want to know if you are one of the people who was buried here at Dixmont Hospital Cemetery. And if you were, can you make these rods cross? Were you buried here at Dixmont? Can you make them go straight if you were a patient at Dixmont? Can you make them go straight? Were you a patient here? That's straight. I don't know if you can see this one. That's very good. Can you make these rods point in the direction of where your headstone is? Over there? Okay. That's very good. If you are a man, can you cross the rods? And if you're a woman, can you keep them straight? Are you a man or a woman? Straight for woman, cross for man. That is straight as an arrow. You are a woman. Hey, thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you so much. Utter nonsense for inquisitive scientists. I feel like there's someone standing behind me, but I don't know if there is. If there's someone standing behind me, can you make these cross? I feel like there's someone behind me to my left, and if there's someone there, can you make these cross? Can you point into the direction of which you're standing? Yep, that's where I feel it. Okay. Thank you. If you're listening to my story, can you point these towards my camera? Not listening to my story. Can you point these towards my camera if you're just standing there to listen to my story? Well, it's pretty close. Oh, you can stay. Stop there. That's 3 chapters in. And if there's anyone here, let's get your consensus and see if you enjoyed that. If you enjoyed that story and would like me to come back to read the other chapters, can you make these cross? Is that a full cross? You'd like to hear this more and have me come back? Can you keep them crossed even when I tilt them? Because I just want to show the different ways that these can move. Because even when they're tilted, they can point forward. Can you make these point towards the camera? That's very good. Yep, that's the camera. You figured it out. You know where the camera is. Very different looking, right? That's the camera. Now, what is crazy is while I was listening to that, obviously, at one point I felt like someone was behind me. And according to the dowsing rods, if they really do work the way we believe they do, supposedly there was someone behind me. At one point, I actually felt like someone may have been touching or trying to grab at the back of my hand, like trying to hold it. I don't know if this is just my imagination running wild or if there's something to it. All right. Well, thank you so much. And as I close this out, I just also want to say that nothing here may follow me home. You must stay here. Nothing may go with me. And I say this in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. I did bring with me some Palo Santo oil. And this oil is a blessing oil. Palo Santo gets rid of specifically negative energy, where if you were to use sage, sage neutralizes. So I'm going to put this Palo Santo oil in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Nothing shall follow me home. Thank you for listening today, and I will come back to read more of this to you. And for you at home, I thank you also for joining me today. Namaste, and stay warm.